Did you know that when electric lights were first introduced in some American cities, people literally screamed in fear and refused to walk under them? Imagine seeing the familiar dark streets of your town suddenly lit up like daytime at night. Some thought it was witchcraft. Others swore the new glowing lamps would blind people or set buildings on fire. And in a way, they weren't totally wrong. Early electric lights were clunky, prone to sparks, and loud, yes, loud, because some of them actually buzzed and hummed as they ran. Still, this strange new invention promised something so revolutionary that humanity would never be the same again. It's no exaggeration to say electricity is the invisible thread that holds our modern world together. Tonight's story is one of crackling experiments, eccentric geniuses, and the slow, steady taming of a force of nature that had once terrified our ancestors. So get comfortable, maybe dim the lights, though I promise yours won't explode, and drift off as we journey into the world of electricity. We'll uncover the long path from ancient Greeks rubbing amber to make static sparks, to Benjamin Franklin flying his famous kite, to Nikola Tesla dreaming of wireless power, and Thomas Edison lighting up city blocks. We'll see how the world before electricity was dark, quiet, and painfully slow, and how the arrival of controlled power transformed every corner of life, from factories to kitchens, from theaters to hospitals. Tonight we'll learn how electricity sparked the modern world. To start, let's imagine what life was like before electricity. No light bulbs, no refrigerators, no computers, no air conditioning, no phones, no X-rays, no internet, and absolutely no plugging in your favorite gadget when the battery runs low. After sundown, you had candles, oil lamps, or fire. All were dim, smoky, and dangerous. Cities were shrouded in darkness at night, making them not just inconvenient but unsafe. Streets were havens for crime after sunset, and homes were filled with soot from burning fuels. Even during the day, most work was done by muscle, human or animal, or by water and wind. Factories depended on rivers to power their wheels. Communication relied on the speed of horses or sailing ships. In other words, life without electricity was hard, slow, and limited. The funny thing is, electricity had always been there, dancing in the skies as lightning, tingling in the fur when you pet a cat, or shocking you when you touch a doorknob after walking across a carpet. Ancient people marveled at these strange forces but couldn't make sense of them. The Greeks noticed as early as 600 BCE that rubbing amber with fur attracted feathers and straw. They didn't know it, but they were watching static electricity. The Romans had electric fish that could jolt unsuspecting swimmers. In the 1600s, William Gilbert, physician to Queen Elizabeth I, gave this mysterious force its name, electricus, from the Greek word for amber. Still, for centuries, electricity was a parlor trick at best, something that made sparks jump but had no practical use. That all began to change in the 18th and 19th centuries. Experimenters like Benjamin Franklin dared to ask whether electricity could be understood, controlled, and even put to work. Franklin's kite experiment in 1752, though dangerous and a little reckless, showed that lightning was the same thing as those sparks from amber. Around the same time, Italian scientist Luigi Galvani made frog legs twitch with an electric spark, accidentally inspiring Alessandro Volta to create the first true battery in 1800. Suddenly, electricity wasn't just something that appeared by chance. It could be generated, stored, and, at least in theory, used. These were the first baby steps toward a revolution. But revolutions don't happen overnight. In the early 19th century, electricity was still mostly for laboratories and demonstrations. Imagine groups of wealthy Victorians gathered in lecture halls to watch scientists make sparks fly from strange machines, or magnets spin wildly under invisible forces. It was science as entertainment, thrilling and mysterious, but not yet useful for everyday life. That would come later, thanks to a wave of daring inventors and engineers. And here's where the human side of our story shines brightest. Think of the personalities: Thomas Edison, tireless, sometimes ruthless, always tinkering until he found something that worked. Nikola Tesla, Brilliant, eccentric, dreaming of free power for all but constantly at odds with Edison. Michael Faraday, the modest bookbinder's apprentice who discovered the principles of electromagnetism that made generators possible. James Clerk Maxwell, the Scottish genius whose equations proved that electricity and magnetism were two sides of the same coin. These were not just scientists, they were visionaries, gamblers, and sometimes stubborn troublemakers who reshaped the world. What made their quest so urgent? Simple, the world was hungry for light and power. In the 19th century, cities were growing fast, filled with factories, theaters, and homes that needed better ways to see, work, and play. Gas lamps lit the streets but were dim, expensive, and hazardous. Steam engines powered machines but belched smoke and soot. People dreamed of something cleaner, brighter, and more reliable. Electricity, though wild and poorly understood, seemed to promise all of that. So tonight, as we drift through this journey, here's how we'll unfold the story. First, we'll look at the struggles and strange experiments that led to the first breakthroughs, the frog legs, the sparking coils, the heated rivalries between inventors trying to outdo each other. Then we'll step back and compare the world before and after electricity, seeing how every aspect of daily life was transformed. After that, we'll follow electricity's spread across continents, lighting up whole cities and fueling industries, even changing the course of wars. Finally, we'll reflect on the legacy of electricity today, how it underpins our modern society and quietly runs everything from heart monitors to smartphones, and what it means for our future. It's worth pausing here to really appreciate just how massive this change was. Before electricity, the rhythm of life followed the sun. People woke at dawn, worked while it was light, and huddled by fires or candles at night. Communication was painfully slow. Factories could only run where water power was available. Medicine was limited by poor lighting and lack of advanced equipment. Then came electricity, and suddenly humanity could stretch its days into the night, move factories anywhere, send messages across oceans in seconds, and harness machines that never tired. It was as if the world itself had been rewired. But this transformation came with struggle. Early electricity wasn't cheap or easy. Power plants had to be built. Cities had to be rewired. Inventors fought bitterly over how electricity should be delivered, direct current or alternating current, sparking the infamous war of currents. People were suspicious, sometimes hostile, toward this strange new force that could kill as easily as it could light a lamp. Fires broke out, accidents happened, and skeptics declared the whole thing too dangerous. Yet step by step, electricity proved itself indispensable. Once people tasted the convenience of light at the flick of a switch, there was no going back. So as you get comfortable tonight, think of the world not too long ago, where even the simplest of tasks was harder, slower, and darker. Imagine what it must have felt like to see your street lit up for the first time, brighter than you'd ever seen it after sunset. Imagine a factory suddenly powered by electric motors that never needed feeding or rest. Imagine a world buzzing, glowing, and humming with possibility. That's the world electricity gave us, and that's the story we'll follow, how humanity harnessed lightning itself and, in doing so, sparked the modern world. If you had been born in the late 1700s or early 1800s and wandered into a lecture hall in London, Paris, or Philadelphia, chances are you would have seen a man in a wig cranking a strange machine until sparks jumped between two brass balls. The audience would gasp, women might scream, and then everyone would laugh nervously as their hair stood on end when the static discharge passed through a conductor they were holding hands with. This was electricity at the time, a parlor trick, a form of entertainment that showed nature's power in miniature but didn't seem to offer much more than a jolt and a story to tell your friends. Nobody really knew what to do with it. The idea that this invisible spark could one day run cities and change every aspect of life seemed absurd. That's what makes the story of early electricity so fascinating. Its path to usefulness was anything but straightforward. It wasn't as though one genius suddenly flipped a switch and the world lit up. Instead, it was decades of failed experiments, rivalries that bordered on soap operas, and moments of both triumph and tragedy. The story is crowded with names: Volta, Galvani, Faraday, Ampere, Ohm, Edison, Tesla, and so many others, but each of them pushed forward a little piece of the puzzle. Together, they transformed a mysterious curiosity into something practical. The first step was understanding that electricity wasn't magic. In the late 1700s, Italian scientist Luigi Galvani noticed something strange while dissecting a frog. When he touched the frog's leg with a metal scalpel, it twitched violently, even though the frog was long dead. Galvani thought he had discovered something he called animal electricity, a mysterious life force that powered living creatures. It wasn't life energy at all, it was simply static electricity making the nerves fire, but Galvani didn't know that. Still, his discovery fascinated people. If electricity could bring dead frog legs back to life, what else might it be capable of? Enter Alessandro Volta, another Italian, who thought Galvani's idea of animal electricity was nonsense. Volta argued that the twitching frog legs weren't proof of a mysterious life force, but rather the result of metals interacting with each other and creating current. To prove it, he built the very first battery in 1800, the voltaic pile. Imagine a stack of discs, alternating between zinc and copper, separated by brine-soaked cloth. It was crude, but it produced a steady flow of current, something no one had managed before. For the first time in history, electricity could be generated and stored on demand. Napoleon himself summoned Volta to demonstrate the invention and was so impressed he awarded him a medal. The voltaic pile was revolutionary, but also limited. It leaked, corroded, and gave small shocks more than it provided usable power. Still, it was a breakthrough. Electricity was no longer a fleeting spark, it was something tangible that could be harnessed. This discovery lit a fire under European scientists, and soon an explosion of experiments began. In 1820, Hans Christian Ørsted in Denmark accidentally discovered that electricity and magnetism were linked. While lecturing students, he noticed that a compass needle shifted every time current passed through a nearby wire. This was the birth of electromagnetism, and it opened doors to an entirely new understanding of how the natural world worked. Not long after, French physicist André-Marie Ampère built on Ørsted's discovery and developed mathematical laws that described how electric currents create magnetic fields. His name would later be immortalized in the unit of electrical current, the ampere. Meanwhile, across the Channel in England, Michael Faraday was tinkering in his tiny basement laboratory. Faraday was not a wealthy aristocrat or university professor but a bookbinder's apprentice turned self-taught scientist. In 1831, Faraday discovered electromagnetic induction, the principle that moving a magnet through a coil of wire could generate electricity. That simple idea became the foundation of electric generators, which power our world to this day. Faraday's early generator was little more than a copper disc spinning between magnets, but it proved that mechanical motion could be turned into electrical energy. In a sense, Faraday cracked the code for modern power plants. Of course, these discoveries didn't translate instantly into glowing light bulbs. For decades, electricity remained the plaything of scientists. Wealthy audiences packed lecture halls to see dramatic demonstrations, sparks jumping across gaps, glowing wires, or rings of iron levitating thanks to magnetic fields. It was impressive but impractical. Nobody yet knew how to scale this force into something that could power homes or businesses. Part of the problem was that early experiments were dangerous. In the 1800s, people treated electricity almost like a carnival attraction. One inventor thought it would be funny to pass current through an entire chain of volunteers holding hands, watching them all jolt in unison when the last man closed the circuit. Others attempted gruesome demonstrations, such as shocking the bodies of executed criminals in attempts to prove or disprove the idea of reanimation. These were crude, ethically questionable stunts, but they revealed just how little people understood about what they were dealing with. Electricity was mysterious, thrilling, and terrifying all at once. The breakthrough toward practical use came when scientists realized electricity could produce light. The first electric lights weren't light bulbs at all, but something called arc lamps. In 1802, a Russian scientist named Vasily Petrov discovered that when two carbon rods touched and then separated slightly, a brilliant, blinding arc of light jumped between them. The arc lamp was astonishingly bright, so bright, in fact, that it was completely impractical for homes. People described its light as dazzling, harsh, and even painful to look at. But for outdoor spaces like lighthouses, train stations, and factories, it was a start. Cities began installing arc lamps in public squares, giving citizens their first taste of streets bathed in artificial light. Yet arc lamps were inefficient, noisy, and dangerous. They sputtered, buzzed, and occasionally threw sparks that set things on fire. Engineers quickly realized they needed something softer, safer, and easier to control. Dozens of inventors tried their hands at creating a workable incandescent bulb, one that used a filament to glow when electricity passed through it. Some prototypes worked briefly but burned out too quickly, or required impractical amounts of power. The light bulb became a sort of holy grail of 19th-century inventors. This is where Thomas Edison enters the story. Edison didn't invent the light bulb, many others had already built versions, but he perfected it in a way that made it practical. In 1879, after testing thousands of materials for filaments, Edison hit upon carbonized bamboo as the ideal solution. His bulbs could glow for hundreds of hours, long enough to be useful in homes and businesses. But even Edison's invention might have fizzled if not for one key insight: light bulbs alone weren't enough. You needed a whole system of wires, generators, and switches to deliver electricity safely and reliably. So Edison set about building the first complete electrical distribution networks, turning light bulbs from a novelty into a transformative technology. Of course, Edison wasn't alone. He had rivals everywhere. Across the Atlantic, British inventors Joseph Swan and Humphrey Davy had been experimenting with similar ideas. And soon another figure would challenge Edison's vision even more directly: Nikola Tesla, the brilliant Serbian-born inventor who believed alternating current, or AC, was far superior to Edison's direct current, or DC. Their battle, the infamous War of Currents, would come later, but already the seeds of rivalry were planted. The story of these early struggles isn't just about machines and wires. It's about people risking their reputations, their fortunes, and sometimes their sanity. Many of these inventors faced mockery, financial ruin, or outright danger. Michael Faraday, for example, nearly blinded himself in his experiments and suffered health issues from constant exposure to chemicals. Tesla would push himself to exhaustion with his relentless work. Edison kept grueling schedules, napping only briefly on the floor of his workshop. Harnessing electricity wasn't glamorous, it was grueling, obsessive, and often thankless. But by the late 1800s, the breakthroughs had piled up enough to make electricity seem less like a magic trick and more like a real tool. Batteries, generators, motors, arc lamps, and finally incandescent bulbs had shown that this strange force could be useful. The question was no longer whether electricity could work, but how it would reshape the world. As you drift deeper into tonight's story, imagine being in those early days, seeing the first flickers of electric light, or hearing the hum of a dynamo spinning in a laboratory. To us, it feels normal, even boring. But to people back then, it was like watching the future being born. These early breakthroughs were the shaky but critical first steps toward the electrified age. The darkness of the past was giving way, though the journey was far from over. For most of human history, life was ruled by the sun. When it rose, so did people. When it set, most activity stopped. Yes, candles, oil lamps, and torches provided a little glow, but they were dim, smoky, and expensive. For the average family, nighttime meant darkness. Reading, sewing, or working after sundown was nearly impossible unless you were wealthy enough to afford large amounts of wax or whale oil. Even then, fire was a constant hazard. Every flame, no matter how small, carried the risk of burning down your home. This rhythm created a very different pace of life. People often went to bed earlier, woke up in the middle of the night for a first sleep, and then returned for a second sleep. This segmented sleep pattern was common in pre-industrial Europe. Darkness dictated the body's schedule, and communities were quieter, slower, and more insulated once evening fell. Travel, too, was affected. Streets at night were dangerous. Unless the moon was bright, roads were unlit, shadowy, and filled with hazards. Thieves often worked under cover of darkness, and many cities had curfews to discourage people from venturing out at night. Compare that to today, where nightlife is often the liveliest part of a city. Electricity didn't just brighten homes, it transformed the very idea of what was possible after dark. Work was also constrained. Factories in the early Industrial Revolution relied on daylight or dangerous oil lamps. Productivity stopped when night came, and accidents were frequent. Imagine the heat and smoke of hundreds of oil lamps inside a textile mill, flames flickering next to cotton dust, one stray spark away from disaster. Electricity eliminated much of this danger and allowed industries to operate around the clock. Even entertainment was limited. Music and storytelling were common, but without bright lighting, options were slim. Large theaters and concert halls used candles or gas lamps, but these were smoky and prone to accidents. Fires in packed venues were tragically common. The invention of safe electric lighting made it possible to gather safely in large groups, opening the door for modern nightlife, cinema, and sports. Now imagine the moment when electricity began to spread. Cities that had been cloaked in shadows suddenly glowed at night. In 1882, New York's Pearl Street Station, built by Thomas Edison, powered hundreds of lamps in a few square blocks of Manhattan. Crowds gathered just to stare at the glow. For many, it was their first time seeing light not from flame, but from glowing wires sealed in glass. People described it as if magic. Once electric lighting arrived, life began to speed up. Shops stayed open later, allowing for evening commerce. Families could gather at night to read, sew, or socialize without worrying about expensive candles. Students could study longer. And slowly, the human relationship with time itself began to change. Before, the day was divided into daylight and dark. After electricity, hours blurred, and schedules stretched. Suddenly, the night was no longer a wall, it was a doorway. Electricity also reshaped communication. Before its arrival, sending a message could take days or weeks. The telegraph, invented earlier in the 1800s, was one of the first technologies to harness electricity for practical use. With it, a message could travel across continents in minutes, transmitted as dots and dashes. Business, journalism, and politics were transformed. A war on one side of the world could be reported almost instantly to the other. By the late 19th century, the telegraph wires that crisscrossed the globe had already begun shrinking distances in ways humanity had never experienced. And then came the telephone. Alexander Graham Bell's invention in 1876 added voices to the equation. For the first time, people could speak across miles as though they were in the same room. The sense of connection and immediacy this created is hard to overstate. It was as if electricity had dissolved the barriers of space. Families, businesses, governments, all suddenly operated on faster, more responsive timelines. At home, electricity didn't just mean light. Once the infrastructure existed, inventors rushed to find new ways to use it. Early electric irons, washing machines, and fans began appearing in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These appliances promised relief from some of the most grueling household chores. Before electricity, washing clothes was a day-long ordeal of heating water, scrubbing, wringing, and drying. With electric washers, a process that once consumed hours could be done in a fraction of the time. This freed up energy, especially for women, who had long been burdened with domestic labor. Slowly, electricity was reshaping not just technology, but social roles and expectations. Entertainment blossomed, too. By the early 1900s, electric theaters showcased films. Families who once gathered around a fire for songs and stories now gathered around radios to hear news broadcasts, live concerts, or serialized dramas. Electricity allowed culture to spread farther, faster, and more powerfully than ever before. Cities, in particular, were transformed. Electric streetcars replaced horse-drawn carriages, making urban travel faster and cleaner. Skyscrapers rose higher, their elevators powered by electric motors. Neon signs lit up nightlife districts, advertising everything from theaters to diners. The modern city, buzzing, glowing, and alive at all hours, was born out of electricity. But it wasn't all positive. The arrival of electricity also deepened inequalities. Rural areas often lagged decades behind cities in access. In the US, the electrification gap meant that while urban households enjoyed electric conveniences, many farmers still relied on oil lamps well into the 1930s. Only with massive government projects, like Roosevelt's Rural Electrification Administration, did electricity spread fully to the countryside. Globally, similar gaps remain today. Billions of people still lack reliable electricity, creating stark differences in opportunity and quality of life. The shift to electricity also created new forms of dependence. People who had once lived with rhythms of sun and fire became reliant on constant power. Blackouts, though temporary, remind us of how deeply modern life is woven into electrical grids. Refrigerators, communication, hospitals, transportation, all of it hinges on electricity flowing without interruption. What once was a luxury is now a necessity. Culturally, electricity redefined what it meant to be modern. In the early 20th century, electrification became a marker of progress. Governments used it as propaganda, showcasing glowing cities as symbols of national strength. Advertisers filled magazines with promises of the electric home, where every chore could be simplified. For families, buying electric gadgets wasn't just about convenience, it was about belonging to the future. One of the most profound changes was psychological. The conquest of darkness reshaped human imagination. For millennia, the night had been associated with mystery, danger, even evil. Myths and legends were filled with creatures of the dark. When electricity pushed back the shadows, people felt a new sense of control over their environment. Cities that once seemed threatening at night became vibrant hubs of activity. Darkness didn't vanish, but humanity's relationship with it fundamentally changed. Think about the way we talk about electricity even today. Light is still a metaphor for knowledge, progress, and hope. To be enlightened is to understand. The spread of electric light was more than a technical achievement, it became a cultural and philosophical symbol. It was as if civilization had taken a decisive step out of the shadows of ignorance and into the brilliance of modernity. By the early 20th century, electricity had become so ingrained that it was hard to imagine life without it. Newspapers ran articles marveling at how quickly people adapted. One writer observed that within weeks of installing electric lights, households forgot how they had ever tolerated the smoke and dimness of gas lamps. It was as if electricity erased the memory of darkness. The transformation wasn't only external. Electricity influenced how humans thought about speed, efficiency, and productivity. Factories could now operate 24/7, fueling economies that never slept. Workers lived by new schedules, their lives timed by electric clocks. Cities glowed with a ceaseless hum, and the idea of downtime began to shrink. Electricity didn't just change what humans could do, it changed what they expected of themselves. Of course, every revolution comes with trade-offs. The constant availability of light disrupted natural sleep cycles, leading to the late-night lifestyles that many of us know today. Electricity also tied societies to vast, vulnerable infrastructures. Power grids became symbols of modernity, but also potential points of failure. Still, despite the challenges, few would argue against the transformation electricity brought. It's easy, from our vantage point, to underestimate the magnitude of this change. But if you step back and compare the before and after, the difference is staggering. Before electricity, dim homes, dangerous streets, limited productivity, and isolation once the sun went down. After electricity, glowing cities, global communication, extended lifespans of daily life, and a world that seemed to accelerate into the future. The story of electricity is not just a tale of inventions, patents, and wires. It's the story of humanity stepping out of one world and into another. A leap so profound that we measure history by it, pre-electric and post-electric. And as drift to sleep, remember that this invisible force is the heartbeat of modern civilization. When electricity was first unleashed as a practical tool, it was not a neat or inevitable story of progress. It was a messy, often dramatic contest of ideas, personalities, and global ambition. And nowhere was this clearer than in what came to be known as the War of Currents, a clash that would decide how electricity flowed into homes, cities, and eventually, the entire world. Thomas Edison, already famous for his incandescent bulb, believed the future lay in direct current, or DC. DC electricity flowed in a single direction, steady and stable, and it powered lamps beautifully. The problem, however, was distance. DC could not travel far without losing power. To supply electricity to a neighborhood, power stations had to be built close by, sometimes only a mile or two apart. For Edison, who had invested heavily in DC systems and patents, this seemed like a solvable problem. But for others, it was a fatal limitation. Enter Nikola Tesla. A brilliant but eccentric inventor, Tesla had a vision of electricity that was grander and more expansive. He believed in alternating current, or AC. Unlike DC, AC electricity changed direction many times per second, and with the help of transformers, it could be sent long distances without significant power loss. In theory, this meant a single power station could send electricity dozens or even hundreds of miles away, a much more efficient and scalable solution for a growing nation. George Westinghouse, an industrialist with a knack for backing big ideas, saw potential in Tesla's vision. He partnered with Tesla, purchasing his patents and building AC systems across the country. Edison, unwilling to give up his stake in DC, fought back with everything he had. The battle was as much about public perception as it was about science. Edison launched a smear campaign against AC, highlighting its dangers. He even went so far as to stage public demonstrations electrocuting animals with alternating current to show how deadly it was. In one notorious event, an elephant named Topsy was killed with AC power, a stunt meant to shock the public into fearing Tesla's system. But despite Edison's theatrics, the science was on Tesla's side. AC was more efficient, more practical, and more adaptable. The turning point came at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, when Westinghouse and Tesla won the contract to power the entire event with AC. As fairgoers walked through dazzling electric displays and glowing pavilions, it became clear that AC was the future. The final nail in DC's coffin came when AC was chosen to harness the power of Niagara Falls, one of the largest hydroelectric projects of its time. When the falls lit up Buffalo, New York, the debate was effectively settled. The modern grid would run on AC. This victory marked the beginning of electricity's rapid spread across the world. Once the infrastructure for AC distribution was in place, cities and towns began stringing wires, building power plants, and installing lamps. What had started as an expensive novelty quickly became a defining feature of modern civilization. The spread of electricity was accelerated by war and industry. During World War I, electric power was harnessed to drive factories at unprecedented scales. Munitions plants, shipyards, and communication networks all relied on steady currents to function. Wars were no longer fought solely with guns and men, they were powered by massive industrial systems that ran on electricity. World War II pushed this even further. Radar, communications, and code breaking all depended on electricity. The Manhattan Project, which led to the atomic bomb, was itself a colossal exercise in electrical engineering, with vast amounts of power diverted to enrich uranium. By mid-century, electricity was not just a convenience, it was a decisive factor in global power. In the meantime, ordinary life was transforming in ways that seemed almost magical. Cities glowed brighter and taller as electric elevators and lights pushed buildings into the sky. Suburbs spread outward, their homes wired for new appliances, refrigerators, radios, vacuum cleaners, and later televisions. Each decade brought new electric miracles that reshaped daily routines. The theater of life itself changed. Before electricity, most people experienced live music only in person, at churches, taverns, or small gatherings. With electricity, microphones, amplifiers, and recording devices brought sound into every household. Radio stations connected millions of listeners in real time. Later, television flickered images into living rooms, making the world feel smaller, more immediate, and more connected. Electricity also revolutionized science and medicine. Laboratories lit by electric lamps could run experiments at all hours. Hospitals equipped with electric lighting, sterilization equipment, and X-ray machines could save lives in ways unthinkable a century earlier. Vaccines could be refrigerated, surgical theaters illuminated, and incubators kept warm. Electricity extended human life not just by hours in the day, but by decades in the span of a lifetime. One of the more subtle but profound transformations came in agriculture. Electric pumps made irrigation easier. Electric refrigeration preserved harvests. Rural electrification, though slower, allowed farmers to mechanize and boost yields. The food supply became more secure, and urban populations grew with greater confidence in their next meal. By the mid-20th century, electrification was no longer a luxury, it was an expectation. Nations without reliable grids were seen as behind in development, while those with glowing cities and humming factories were symbols of progress. Governments invested heavily in electrification as a way to project modernity and power. The Soviet Union electrified vast stretches of its territory as part of Lenin's famous slogan, "Communism is Soviet power plus electrification." For them, electricity wasn't just practical, it was ideological. Meanwhile, the US and Western Europe raced to build ever larger power plants, stringing wires across landscapes in an intricate web of dependence. The grid became one of humanity's most ambitious engineering feats, a system so complex and sprawling that it often felt invisible until something went wrong. Yet for all its successes, the spread of electricity was uneven. While major cities glowed with neon and incandescent light, billions of people in rural Asia, Africa, and South America still lived much as their ancestors had, by the sun and fire. This global imbalance remains one of the most striking features of electricity's story, its power to connect and uplift, but also to divide. Culturally, electricity reshaped imagination. Writers and artists marveled at the new glow of cities, painting neon landscapes and penning futuristic tales. The very idea of the future became tied to electric visions, glowing towers, flying machines, and cities that never slept. Electricity wasn't just an invention, it was a symbol of modernity, optimism, and human ingenuity. But it also inspired caution and fear. The same currents that lit lamps could kill in an instant. People who grew up fearing lightning now found themselves living with artificial bolts running through their walls. Fires caused by faulty wiring were common in the early years, and blackouts often brought cities to a standstill. Electricity was powerful, but also fragile. The global spread of electricity accelerated in the second half of the 20th century with massive infrastructure projects. Dams like the Hoover, the Three Gorges, and countless others became monuments to the power of electrification. Entire rivers were redirected to fuel turbines that could light up nations. At the same time, nuclear power emerged, offering electricity generated not by coal or water, but by splitting atoms. The promise was almost limitless power, though the risks, as disasters like Chernobyl later revealed, were just as immense. Even as electricity spread, it transformed with each new wave of technology. The post-war boom brought computers, which themselves required vast amounts of electricity but also opened the door to a digital age. Factories automated. Offices filled with typewriters, then calculators, then mainframes. By the time the internet arrived, electricity wasn't just powering lights and motors, it was the very bloodstream of a new kind of civilization. At every stage, electricity's spread revealed a simple truth: once people had it, they couldn't imagine life without it. Cities planned around grids. Economies revolved around access to power. Children grew up with glowing lamps and humming radios, never knowing the deep darkness of nights their grandparents endured. In a few short generations, electricity didn't just change the world, it became the world. And yet, even now, electricity carries echoes of its turbulent birth. The rivalry between Edison and Tesla, the drama of the World's Fair, the glowing promise of Niagara Falls, these moments live on in the networks and wires that stretch invisibly above us. Every time a light flickers on, every time a phone buzzes, we are living inside the outcome of that century-old battle. It's worth pausing to reflect on just how quickly this transformation happened. In 1880, almost no one had electric light. By 1920, tens of millions did. By 1950, it was the backbone of entire nations. Few revolutions in history have spread so widely, so quickly, and so irreversibly. So the story of electricity's spread is not simply about engineering. It's about ambition, rivalry, war, and culture. It's about how a glowing wire in a glass bulb became the foundation of modern civilization. And it's about how humanity, once bound by the rhythms of sun and fire, stepped boldly into a world that glows, a world that never sleeps. Today, electricity is so woven into our lives that it almost feels invisible. We flip a switch, and light appears. We plug in a phone, and a stream of energy quietly fills the battery. We barely notice the buzz of the refrigerator or the soft hum of a laptop fan. Yet these small, constant presences are the echoes of one of humanity's most transformative achievements. In fact, the very fact that electricity feels ordinary now is proof of how completely it has reshaped the world. Modern electricity is no longer just about bulbs and motors. It is the hidden foundation beneath everything we do. Think of the skyscraper-filled skyline of any major city, glass towers glowing with office lights long into the night. Each building is a miniature ecosystem of electrical needs, elevators rising smoothly, air conditioning systems humming, water pumps pushing supplies to the upper floors, computers flickering in cubicles. Without electricity, these structures would be dark and lifeless monuments. With it, they are living, breathing machines of human activity. One of the clearest examples of electricity's legacy is communication. The telegraph and radio of the past century have grown into the internet, smartphones, and global networks. Today, billions of people carry in their pockets a device that connects them instantly across continents. None of this would exist without reliable electrical grids, data centers, and satellites powered by electricity. Every message sent, every video streamed, every search typed into a browser depends on a vast ocean of energy flowing behind the scenes. The modern world runs on information, and information runs on electricity. Medicine too has been utterly transformed. Walk into a hospital today, and you'll find an orchestra of electrical devices, MRI machines mapping the brain, ventilators supporting breathing, monitors tracking heart rhythms, robotic arms assisting surgeons. Treatments that were unimaginable even 50 years ago are routine now, because electricity makes them possible. In a quiet way, the glow of machines in hospital rooms is one of the most life-giving uses of this force. Where once electricity dazzled with carnival lights and neon signs, today it sustains premature babies, extends lives, and gives second chances. Electricity is also the heartbeat of entertainment and culture. Movies, music, video games, all flow from it. A century ago, families might gather around a single radio in the evening. Today, streaming platforms beam endless stories to millions of screens simultaneously. Virtual reality, artificial intelligence, massive concerts with electric sound systems, these are not just diversions, but ways in which electricity shapes how we experience imagination itself. Art no longer stops at a painted canvas or a live performance. Electricity has given us a new stage, a new canvas, and even a new way to dream. On a broader scale, electricity defines the modern economy. Factories now run 24 hours a day, lit by bright lamps and powered by efficient machines. Global trade, stock markets, banking, all of it depends on servers kept alive by electricity. A single power outage in a financial hub can ripple into billions of dollars in losses. The globalized economy isn't just metaphorically connected, it is physically tied together by grids and cables, flowing currents that keep the gears of commerce turning. Transportation too is in the middle of a new electric chapter. For over a century, oil and gasoline reigned supreme, but the rise of electric cars has signaled a shift. Companies like Tesla, echoing the name of the inventor himself, are building vehicles powered entirely by electricity. High-speed trains, subway systems, and even experimental aircraft are running on electrical power. Where once coal-powered locomotives symbolized industrial might, now sleek electric vehicles stand as emblems of innovation and sustainability. Yet electricity's modern legacy is not only one of triumph. It is also one of challenge. Generating electricity has long relied on fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. These fuels brought incredible power but also devastating environmental costs. Cities once wrapped in smog, rivers choked by runoff, and the steady warming of the planet are all consequences of how we have fueled our electric appetite. The same force that illuminated humanity's future has, ironically, cast a shadow on it. This has sparked a new chapter: renewable energy. Wind turbines dot coastlines and plains, their blades quietly turning currents of air into currents of electricity. Solar panels glitter on rooftops and desert expanses, transforming sunlight into usable power. Hydroelectric dams, tidal generators, and even experiments with geothermal energy are all part of a global race to sustain electricity without destroying the world it lights. In some ways, this is as revolutionary a moment as the war of currents over a century ago. Instead of choosing between AC and DC, humanity is now choosing between old fuels and renewable futures. The story of electricity today is also a story of inequality. In wealthy nations, people complain if their Wi-Fi is slow, while in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, families still live without reliable light after dark. A third of the world's population remains energy poor, relying on firewood or kerosene. For them, electricity is not invisible, it is a dream, a marker of progress, and sometimes even a matter of life and death. Aid organizations and governments alike see electrification as key to development. A single power line can mean children studying after sunset, clinics refrigerating vaccines, or farmers irrigating crops. Electricity's legacy, then, is also its unfinished business. Politically, electricity has become a lever of power. Nations rich in oil, coal, or rare earth minerals command influence because they fuel the grids of others. Blackouts, whether caused by natural disasters or cyber attacks, are reminders of how fragile the system can be. Modern warfare has even targeted electricity directly: bombings of power plants, hacking of grids, or sanctions cutting off access to crucial technology. The glow of a city at night is not just a sign of prosperity, it is a strategic vulnerability. Still, despite these tensions, electricity has brought humanity to heights unthinkable before. Consider space exploration. Rockets, satellites, space stations, all of it depends on electricity. Solar panels unfurling in orbit, powering research that peers into galaxies billions of light-years away. The International Space Station, a symbol of international cooperation, is a floating electrical marvel. Even the dream of colonizing Mars is tied to the problem of generating and sustaining electricity beyond Earth. Without it, our reach into the stars would be little more than fantasy. What makes electricity remarkable is how it has become both background and foreground. It hums quietly in walls, charging the devices we use to talk, work, and love. But it also makes possible the most ambitious undertakings of our species. It is, in every sense, the pulse of the modern world. And perhaps that is electricity's greatest legacy. It has changed not just what we do, but how we think about possibility. Before electricity, the night was a barrier, a time when work ended and darkness reigned. Now, day and night are blurred, with cities glowing into the horizon and work stretching endlessly across time zones. Before electricity, distance was a gulf. Now, voices and images leap across oceans instantly. It has collapsed space and time, rewriting the limits of what humanity can imagine. As we lie in our beds, the irony is that the very comfort of this moment, the soft glow of a lamp, the quiet hum of a fan, the charge in a phone by the nightstand, all of it is thanks to electricity's journey. From sparks in ancient amber to Tesla's dreams and Edison's stubbornness, to the humming grids and glowing cities of today, electricity has become so ordinary it is almost invisible. Yet it is, in truth, extraordinary. And so, as the story winds down, let your mind drift with that thought. The same invisible current that powers the world outside your window is what carried you through this story tonight. It is the force that makes your life possible, in ways so quiet you rarely stop to notice. Electricity is not just an invention. It is a companion, a silent presence, and a reminder that even the most powerful forces can also be the gentlest. If you are still awake, have a good night's sleep, and I will see you in the next video.